Do you have a ministry or a church that needs to be trauma informed? Are you a fivefold ministry leader who is leading God's people in any capacity, whether you're in marketplace ministry, whether you are leading within the four walls of the church? This episode is for you. Today, Miss Yvette Currie is going to share with you many things you can do to make sure that your ministry is trauma proof. Welcome everyone back to the Faith and Mental Wellness Podcast. We have a very special guest today. We have Miss Yvette Currie. Welcome, Miss Yvette. Thank you so much for being here and agreeing to be on this podcast today.
My pleasure. Thank you. It's an honor.
You're welcome. So before we get started, I want to introduce you guys to who she is, okay? So Miss Yvette Currie is a licensed marriage family therapist, running her private practice in San Diego, California since 2011. Her book made it to #1 as a hot new release in Amazon in Psychology and Christianity for several weeks. She was one of the first deployed resiliency counselors in the world, targeted sexual assault and resilience as a civilian clinician deploying on an aircraft carrier. How neat is that? She currently has the first place in International Speech Contest, Western Division winner for Toastmasters International. And you guys, that is a nonprofit who has contests where people are competing to speak and competing to share their expertise. So thank you so much, Ms. Currie, for being here. And let's get into this episode.
My pleasure. Thank you for that intro, man.
And so my first question for you is, what is church hurt in the context of sexual assault?
So I'll preface this. I'll start this out with the fact that the church is a hospital. Jesus is the doctor. So the church is going to be attracting people, as my pastor fondly calls it, people who are all jacked up. So it's going to be people that are attracted that have all kinds of issues going on. And so that's going to mean people who've been sexually assaulted. That's going to mean people who may be also perpetrators of sexual assault. You know, people who grew up with sexual assault, especially repeated sexual assaults. There, a lot of times perpetrators have a background where this happened to them as well. So this is going to be pulling in people who are targeting people who are vulnerable. So as we know one side of the psychology spectrum, we know trends, we know tendencies. There are people who have more malicious intent on the other side. So they know, more vulnerable folks, more injured folks are going to be going into the church. So there may be people, and I know that as for a fact, who are looking to see who they can target within. There's going to be people in the church who have issues with pornography. And, when unfortunately, younger and younger folks are being exposed to pornography, not trying to scare any parents out there, but if a kid has a cell phone, there's a chance they've already seen pornography. So there's a tone, according to the research, that's being set in how people are viewing normalization of sex through the lens of pornography, and they think certain behaviors, violent behaviors, assaultive behaviors, are normal, some, and are bringing that into the church. So it's a mixture. There's going to be human trafficking victims who come to the church for healing. That comes to mind also for me because here in San Diego, there's a big human trafficking population. We're on the 5 corridor, and we are right between borders, San Diego, bordering Mexico, and then heading north to Canada. We're not an isolated situation by any means. The interior of the country has a large amount of this issue as well. But that's going to bring along a whole host of other things. I don't want to go on for too long. I want to make sure I stay with your question. So I'm going to pause there.
That's amazing. What you're saying and what I'm hearing is that the church needs more education around the various
Mm.
types of sexual assault that people can experience. So on that side, I'm hearing, okay, make sure that you are aware that people who have been trafficked, what they may deal with. So you know how to address them. You know how to be
Mm.
able to support them in their faith, right? Also, I hear the other side is perpetrators. I know some churches, I know that I've been a part of or visited in my area who have a system in place to where if a person wants to work with children or work with anyone within ministry, when it comes to especially the small children, they have to have a background check,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
which is really good. But not every church has that.
Yes, I think that's
Yeah.
tremendous progress because of the church culture I was raised in. And I'll say a lot of the examples I'm giving, I know this isn't everyone, okay? I know this isn't every church, but I'm giving you examples from what I've seen and what I've worked with. The church culture I was raised in was trusting. It was like, oh, we're all Christians, we're all here, we all, you know, leave your purse out on the seat and go, have a conversation. Well, I would say don't even do that. That was the culture I was raised in, church culture. So I think it's progressive for there to be even security guards. Some people are not a fan of that, but a little added protection there. And then the background checks. Yeah, I was going to bring that point up later. It's showing, hey, the exact point that I'm making. The church is attracting injured people because it's a hospital. Um, you know, Jesus is the doctor, so we're going to be getting across the spectrum. It isn't like just injured lambs coming into the church, right? Just an injured, wounded bird. You know, it's it's messy. So, or it can be very messy. So,
While we're on this topic, have you had clients in the past who have fit these categories that you just mentioned, where you've had to kind of help them navigate, within the church, or vice versa, where you've had to help churches that kind of navigate this particular area when it comes to sexual assault and having the injured lambs come in?
mm, I do get a fair amount of referrals coming through from various churches. One mega church in particular in San Diego, because I'm kind of one of their clinical resources, who are coming out with um, a variety of injuries, and they just need to process it somewhere where they can, as they've described it, they don't feel judged. So that's a key indicator of what we can watch while we are in the church trying to be the hands and feet of God, right? To try and enact the mission. Um, People are coming to a clinician outside the church where they can speak openly about a variety of addictions. It could be, same sex attraction. It could be infidelity. It could be violence, a fair amount of domestic violence coming at me, as they're not addressing things in the manner at the church where either, I'm not going to blame the churches. Maybe they're not being open about it because they're scared, and maybe the church isn't addressing stuff openly enough. More, as you and I were talking before the recording started, maybe the church isn't feeling comfortable to just really get down and dirty in some of these topics, but they're bringing it up outside the church. So there's work to be done there.
I definitely agree with you. I've seen it across the spectrum too. I'm sure you have too. You have churches who are very open to mental health and they welcome it, and then you have some that push it away completely. Probably like a while back, I had a client, and she was actually a human trafficking survivor.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you don't study human trafficking when it comes to their mental health, it's going to be really difficult from someone from the outside looking in to truly understand the different layers and the different things they have to heal from. It's so layered. And by the time I saw
True.
her, she had already dealt with so much of her past, and she's forgiven herself, but she still was dealing with people pleasing, boundaries,
Yes.
attracted some of the wrong guys. And so she would share
Yes.
with me how the church, she felt like they were always judging her, but I feel like they didn't really understand exactly what the healing can look like for a person who has been through that much trauma and that much hurt. It's not overnight, just like us, imagine
Mhm.
not being in that type of lifestyle, and then you in that lifestyle having to heal from it after being in it for years.
Mhm.
And so I definitely would love to see churches be more educated about human trafficking, excuse me,
Mhm.
and what that looks like and how they can support the survivors who are coming in as well.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic, fantastic point. Having maybe guest speakers come in, having survivors who have been through the healing process who want to give back in service come in, um, support groups, that have the potential for confidential sharing and discussing. Um, I think those would go a long way. I think those would be tremendously, tremendously helpful.
Someone experiences it and they're going in as a member. But what about if a
Mhm.
person is actually at a church and they may be groomed by a leader or a fellow member? And what does that look like for a person on average?
So I look at that question. I'm looking at it through the lens of the vulnerability
Mm-hmm.
that may be screaming out to others, um, such as um, like you mentioned a couple things like people pleasing, no boundaries, a person that is kind of holding it down, holding it within, almost inverting, and then in the cognitive distortion side of things, blaming themselves, self-loathing, all that self-talk, it's my fault, that kind of a way of thinking. And so these areas make a person a target, very vulnerable. Also, a person isolated, a person that's been rejected by their family. And I know I see statistically again in people who identify in LGBTQ, all the letters community, have, there's reports on them being targeted if they've been rejected by their family, and God forbid, then the church is also doing the same thing. So um, a person that's got all those traits tends to be, um, lack of a better phrase, easier to prey on and target. And I know we're going to get into Bible verses. We're going to get into, essentially empowering mantras that are going to be looking at the exact reverse of these things. Something very interesting to me in the research I did for this book is the parallel in uh, a stereotypical the church culture I grew up in. Okay, it parallels victim mentality, where you keep silent. Uh, the prevalent concept in the church culture I was raised in was, essentially children are to keep silent, spare the rod, spoil the child, and man is the head of the household. I know these verses are in the Bible, but those were like the top, the focus. And so the way I see it is, if that is the prevalent mindset, that's very close to that victim mindset mentality, keeping silent, holding it in, holding it down, um, not questioning authority, not questioning leadership. Um, so those particular areas, I see, um, I see a crossover, and so the antithesis of this, the examples that I'm going to get into are biblical, um, but but some people may not be having what I'm saying, because it does fly in the face of some of that cultural, deeply embedded church culture from back in the day.
I hope that you are enjoying today's episode thus far. So be sure to check out Miss Currie's book called Church Proof: From Burn to Church Hurt Resistant. I will put the link for that in the description box. Also, be sure to visit empowerpurposeacademy.com, where we offer certifications, training, books, resources, even blogs and other podcast episodes that are on pain, passion, and purpose to help you navigate how to really counsel God's people His way through mental health and faith. And so, also, I want to offer you a discount and a coupon code on all of the services, and there's a lot to choose from. So, use code EPA in all caps, EPA, and receive 10% off of everything, even the courses, certifications, trainings, ebooks, and so much more. And so my next question will be, you were just talking about the parallel between keeping silent and the church and scriptures. So what would you recommend a person do who is in this situation and breaking the shame of speaking out about their experience?
One key that's so important is having a non-judgmental other. It could be a therapist, but a non-judgmental other to walk alongside. I look at the example of Jesus. Jesus was relational. He wasn't a drive-by, Bible verse, did you know that's a sin? He was relational. So having somebody who can walk alongside, and sometimes all that is needed is an ear. So to garner some sort of support, I would encourage the person to be able to look in selecting a church. What is the communication process inside that church for reporting? And then part of an issue sometimes people have who struggle with boundaries, for example, and people pleasing, have a hard time with this one of paying attention to what your gut is saying. What is your heart telling you? What feels wrong or off or a disconnect? Even something as maybe innocuous as a hug. If you don't like that, don't do it. So that's like this much of an example. But having the capacity to pay attention and then act on that, and then look at like I said, the chain of communication in your church for reporting inappropriate behavior. And again, look at the match between what you're told and what's happening. If you say something, how are you treated? If you say something, is there, a respectful response? Are you taken into account? Or is there's so much pushback that you notice in yourself, you're like, oh, you know what, maybe I didn't see that right, or never mind. Or so looking at the structure in the church is important as well, and this could mean questioning your leader. So that is the opposite of keeping silent in the church or everything that is taught to you. Keeping stock of, the Bible, Proverbs talks about guarding your heart is the most important thing you can do. And that is how I interpret this verse. You're looking at what's happening in your heart, you're looking at what's happening around you, and you're gauging and you're reading your gut and your instinct, and you're taking that, you're attending to that.
Oh, I love that. So what I'm hearing is, every church should have a grievance policy. How are they handling complaints? What is the protocol? What is the church hierarchy, right? Who's the person you would go to if you have a complaint? Will you be heard? Because I can definitely, as you were speaking, I can definitely look back when I was younger, and I definitely experienced some like inappropriate hugs or getting a little too close with my I feel a little uncomfortable, but I also didn't feel comfortable really saying anything. And so I kind of just avoided that person, right? And so I definitely think that what you're saying is you're not just gonna pray about it. This person needs to be addressed. They need to be confronted if this person continues to feel uncomfortable and they're sharing their experience with whoever's in charge. As you just said earlier, going back, the church attracts all types of people. It's just not people who are just really hungry for God. They can be there. They can be predators, have ulterior motives. And so I think we should definitely be mindful of that as well. And you mentioned too the different populations, right, who are vulnerable. LGBT. I can't pronounce all the letters either. I
All the
apologize to the
acronyms, all the
community
acronyms. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
advance. But I definitely, feel like they definitely need to have a space to be able to talk about what their experience because of what they their lifestyle. People automatically, I feel like, put them in a category. As you said before, he's relational. He's
Mhm.
relational. He cares about all people. So I definitely agree with you on that for sure.
What a great listener and summarizer you are. I'm like, yes. Okay. May I follow up with just a point to like fine point on that? So one thing I will say with the LGBTQ plus population is the integration is happening. It isn't like they're over there, we're over here. People that have been assaulted in childhood by same sex, opposite sex. That's going to have an effect on a person's read on their own sexuality, questioning and confusion. It could be this is how a person now identifies as a result. There's all kinds of things coming from there. And so when I frequently hear people talk about this topic, it's very uncomfortable for the church often, not for all churches. But I look at it like, when a person walks into a church who clearly has an issue with gluttony, okay? There's something going on there with, they're actively choosing in their lifestyle, because that's the terminology that's used in LGBTQ, to eat a lot and not exercise in the Bible. So it's just like, to pick something out isn't our job. Our job is to love. The Bible says to work out your own salvation. Okay? If God is who he says he is, he can do anything. He can change a heart. He can change a lifestyle. Our job isn't to kind of distinguish between sin. I don't agree with this lifestyle, but it's like, I don't agree with divorce. Jesus said that's sexual immorality if you get remarried. But that's not my hill to die on. I'm not relating to people that way. It's my job is to love. I'm going to do my best. So that's something I wanted to add to that.
That's so good, and I agree. I definitely I know this is a topic that people might find a little touchy, and my stance is the same thing, right? I don't categorize just this one group over here and a group over there, right? And so I tell, my fellow colleagues, hey, if you are treating someone who's in that lifestyle, you're treating their symptom, you're treating their trauma, their depression, their anxiety, treat them the same like you treat anybody else. Like you said, that's not my heel when I'm dealing with a person from a clinical lens. We're not dealing with all that. Now, if it comes up, okay, great. They ask me my questions about my thoughts or whatever, I'll share that with them in a respectful way. But I've honestly, in the past, have never had an issue with someone from the population coming to see me because I always treated them with love and respect like I treated anybody else. Right. And so I like what you said about, stop separating and look at them the way Christ looks at them too. So my next question for you would be, what are 5 ways that that a person can begin to heal from sexual assault from within the church?
I have so many thoughts on this, so much clinical
Yeah.
stuff, and I don't want to crowd with
Yes.
information. So I thought, okay, I'm going to use an acronym, and maybe this will be a good baseline for people to apply who are watching this and listening to this podcast. So I look at the acronym with the letter A for acknowledge. So acknowledge what happened. That's rich in and of itself because of a little bit of what we touched on earlier. There's a propensity to maybe bury it, or that didn't really happen, or maybe that's not a big deal, or nobody's going to hear me anyway, or, that person in leadership, I don't want to ruin their family, their job, their livelihood. There's all that stuff that can really take it down to 0. So acknowledge, okay? And where acknowledgement occurs, that's open-ended within yourself, for starters. And then from there, the second part of the acronym is F, or feel. Feel it. So sometimes, especially, in clinical work, I'll see people who are trying to rush that process, and I call it like jumping over, like like the speed bump or just leaping over the feeling. They're like, oh yeah, this happened. Okay. So anyway, and it's like, no, let's take a moment and acknowledge that harm, that hurt that has been done. And give yourself that, maybe some folks who are in a rush don't know how to do it because they never got it when they were growing up. So acknowledge it, feel it. The next letter is E for execute. And I think this came from my work in the military with tactical, strategic execution. So execute is doing something with it. And that, again, it's wide open. That could be a million things. It could be you are telling someone, you are reporting this to the police, you are reporting this to the chain of protocol within the church if you feel like you're comfortable doing that. You're going to get therapy. You're doing all the things that we probably hear about in the grocery store now. All the magazines are on the front. It's all about mindfulness and meditation and go running and go do all these things. But execute is the next one. Do something with it. You are not sitting eternally in this feeling and just spiraling, okay? So this is movement oriented. And the last letter is to let it go, L. And by let it go, now I'm thinking of the song from Frozen. By let it go, I don't mean just get over it. I don't mean it like that. What I mean is when people kind of perseverate on thoughts like, why me? What is it about me that's attracting this into my life, or people targeting me? What's wrong with me? Those type of cognitions are so destructive. And so what I mean by let it go is doing these steps that preceded the L, and acknowledge this happened, yes, and now I'm ready to take my next step and move on. This happened, yes. So I thought using that acronym could kind of distill all the steps down as a start. This isn't the end all be all, but it might help some people who need it real simple.
Yes, I love it. And I definitely think that's a great way to help break the barriers of shame, right? To get the conversation going, to help them to acknowledge. 'Cause I'm pretty sure when you experience something like sexual assault, shame comes along with it because you blame yourself. You think it's your fault, as you were saying. Am I attracting all these different people towards me? And so that's perfect. I love it. And of course, we know as therapists that every person is different. Every client is different. Every situation is different. And so what I love about therapy, is that there's no cookie cutter approach to any one situation.
Right, absolutely. Right.
You mentioned earlier scriptures you wanted to share in reference to our topic for today.
Yeah, there are so many. I was just reviewing through my book last night with the amount of Bible verses that I loaded in there on basically on power, and I'm going to recall as many as I can. I might not have the references on the top of my head, but one in particular is for us to be wise as serpents, innocent as doves, and that to me is really key. Well, in life, but in the context of the church, having that open heart, having that gentle spirit, but you're scanning your horizon too. As I said earlier, don't leave your purse. People are going to hear this and go, I'm clutching my purse. Don't leave your purse on the pew across the room. Just, guarding your heart, like it says in Proverbs. That's the most important thing, is that the guarding of your heart. And it isn't all or nothing, as we talk about in therapy all the time, of cognitive distortions. It's not all wide open, and it's not completely closed off because you've been hurt by somebody in the church. That's there. Okay. But there's a lot of other stuff there too. And so having that capacity to be in the middle, to look with a reasonable response, not to go into all or nothing black and white thinking, kind of keeping it yes and taking a look at boundaries. The Bible has some great verses on that. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. In regard to that, as I talked about earlier, the maybe some of the church culture personality traits that for some people growing up, like how I was raised, of like, you need to keep it down, keep it silent, say yes to everything, say yes to authority, never question. That is not biblical. So it's fascinating to me that that's what I got growing up, and a lot of, I would say, Americana seemed to be, there was kind of a wave that was into that. And I won't name any names in here, but of who got that movement going. But that was a movement for a while, it seemed like. I see you nodding your head on that. And so that isn't biblical. So the way Jesus behaved is, he was not a people pleaser. He was the exact opposite. If he had people complaining about him, like the Pharisees, the Sadducees, I remember a few times his disciples would come to him and say, Jesus, you upset these people. And I think one time he said, and yeah. And another time they're offended, he said, ignore them. There's another verse where Jesus says, your opinion of me means nothing. Okay. I see you chuckling on that one. I love that verse because it is the opposite of that mindset and that mentality of just like folded inward. It's me, it's my fault, I can't say anything. Oh no. So there's so many references throughout that we're powerful. We tread on serpents and scorpions. It's not a spirit of fear. And if we come forth toward our enemies without any of that intimidation and fear, that's going to have an impact on our enemies.
Do you have anything else that you want to share with the audience before we end today?
I think we covered it. I've thoroughly enjoyed doing this with you. I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for what you're doing. It's just been a joy just to have this conversation with you in front of these people. I hope, we touched on some areas that maybe people haven't heard it said in this way, or maybe it opened up a little more of a light bulb in some areas. So yeah, yes. That's all I got.
Thank you for your yes and for being so vigilant about coming on. This is definitely needed. I know for a fact it's going to bless so many people, open up their eyes, and even also churches who have good intentions, right? Prayerfully, they will hear this as well and want to implement different things in their church in order to make sure that people are safe and have a soft place to land.
Yeah, it's a great way to wrap it up.
Thank you so much for being here today. So be sure to subscribe, give us 5 stars, and also visit www.faithandmentalwellness.faith to learn more about our directory, our resources, and take our free quiz called Are You Battling with Shame? Thank you so much for being here, and we'll talk to you guys in the next episode.